I mean, I know that you guys have struggled with balancing your budget. You've gone through a lot of changes, some difficult choices that you've had to make. But do you know what the state owes?
Yeah, I do. Actually, as of today, as of about 10 minutes ago when she double-checked the number, because we checked it a couple times a month, and it rolls. It's kind of a rolling number. They have not caught up with us in a long time, but right now we're at $8.8 million.
And that's a significant amount of money when you consider that your budget shortfall this year, is still approaching a large number, despite all the changes that you've had to make.
Right. Yeah. We over the last, since March 2009, we have cut approximately $43 million, or saved. I mean, either through cuts, eliminating of positions or programs, or just, saving money through reductions and so forth, utilities and all that kind of stuff. That has entailed cutting about 275 positions across the board: teacher, support staff, administration. Administration pay was frozen for 2.5 years. In fact, and then we were also directed to pay a higher portion of our health care costs, so that effectively it was a pay cut, not a pay freeze, for 2.5 years. The last September, when we did our budget, and we did it in September because we have to meet the state deadline, but we did it knowing that we were in negotiations with our two unions, and that was going to be ending soon. But we passed a budget in September that put us at a projected operating fund deficit of $9.2 million. Now, then in December, we approved both of the two new contracts, which both freeze the pay for teachers and support staff for this year, for 11-12, okay? Retroactive back to July 1st, which is the start of our fiscal year. That saved us about $4.6 million, and then we were able to cut another $3.3 in non-personnel cuts. In other words, programs, utilities, that kind of stuff. The building budgets is rolling back. Building budget's another 5%. And so for the first time in whatever that is, 3 years, we've got a very slight, knock on wood, don't say it too loud, you'll jinx us, surplus.
There are many programs that you've had to cut, forgetting the amount of jobs or teachers that have had to been let go, but just the programs themselves that you've had to cut to reach that number.
Yeah, and we've been very, very careful and very deliberate to try to stay as far away from the classroom as possible. So, we haven't, for example, cut the band program, and that's one that you'll often hear. That's kind of a traditional favorite, not favorite, that's the wrong term, but right. A traditional target when hard times come. Or we haven't cut the fine arts program or the spring musical. I mean, what we've been able to do, we have cut some made some very difficult cuts. We eliminated elementary band, for example. We eliminated one of our reading intervention programs for struggling readers, which was extremely successable. However, it was also extremely expensive because it was basically one-on-one intervention. Right. And so, and that's a real hard thing to do when you are a professional educator and you've geared your entire life to helping kids learn. But it comes down to dollars and cents.
It's estimated that with the bills outstanding and the budget deficit that the state is dealing with, that the state itself is roughly $16.5 billion in the hole today.
Right.
And, with you had mentioned the school lunch program, and that is a direct credit or that is supported by the state, is it not?
I believe some of that money comes from the feds. There are both federal and state components to the free and reduced lunch program. What it really is, I mean, we talk about it in terms of a reflection of the socioeconomics. In other words, our low-income population has quintupled over the last several years. Those children are not just unable to buy lunch every day. They also tend then, logically, to come from families that do not have other resources for their kids.
Right.
So they're coming from families whose mom or dad or both have lost their jobs, or so they can't buy winter clothes for them. They can't buy all that stuff that goes along with mom and dad being able to provide a middle income, middle class kind of existence goes away in this kind of economy, and yet those kids are still have their constitutional right to a free and appropriate public education. So all of those challenges come with them every single day to school.
Is there a break point that you see coming? For instance, let's say that the state defaults because constitutionally, although they have a moral obligation to pay their debts, constitutionally they do not. If the state were to default, how would that affect the district?
Well, obviously, it would be devastating. I can't speak in terms of specific numbers because that's not even a scenario I think that that we've even discussed publicly in any way that I can comment on. And I want to go back on one thing you just said, because the state constitution has redone, whatever the right term is, as amended in 1970, says that the state shall have, not may, shall pay for the majority cost of public education. Now, for most people, you and I probably, I'm going to assume you're in the same boat as me on this.
Yeah.
Majority means 51%.
Right.
They have never, ever come anywhere close to 50%. And I think that the state now is funding about, we're in the high 20s or low 30s. The last number I saw was 28%, but that was several months ago. So the state has never met its constitutional obligation. Instead, for 40 years, they've argued back and forth, what does primary mean? In other words, you and I say it means 51%. That's a reasonable assumption. They've argued that primary means the best that we can do.
Child Left Behind Act really hamstrings schools who are facing these budget deficits because testing scores could be directly correlated to the lack of revenue to be able to give them the equipment they need to pass.
Well, in fact, we have noticed that since the recession, and we said this 3 years ago when the recession hit, because we had done and I am very proud to say, tremendous job of improving our academic performance. We have the test scores to prove it. Our scores have gone up 18 percentage points over the last 8 years. In the midst of all this crazy growth, we also redesigned our curriculum, made it more rigorous, made it more accessible for kids to give them more challenges, more opportunities. We did all the right things while we were building 25 buildings over 18 years. It's astounding what we did. And then the bottom dropped out. And we said 3 years ago, you are going to see a point at which these cuts that we've had to make are going to start hurting our academic performance. Now, our scores kind of stabilized, that's the positive way to put it, or flatlined if you want to look at it the other way, this year. And one could argue that we're starting to see the impact of the economy because, at least among other things, there's also just the foibles of once you reach that 90%, it's very, very difficult to keep improving because it's the math doesn't work the right way with that. But the fact of the matter remains, if we still had more money to improve our resources and to improve our tools that we have for our kids, we may still be seeing those scores going up. Now, that doesn't relieve us, unfortunately, that doesn't relieve us of the obligation to do that. That's one of the real problems with No Child Left Behind, which does many good things. Let's be fair. It was both an accountability tool, that was the conservative aspect, and it was a civil rights tool, that was the democratic or the liberal aspect of it. And it's worked in both ways. But the problem is it requires all of this significant change and provides no money. None.
Right.
And so, and yet they promised that they were going to give money. None of it's ever materialized. And so these districts, and then exactly what you alluded to, then the districts are penalized when they don't reach these random, arbitrary lines in the sand that, by the way, weren't created by educators. I mean, any parent can tell you, any parent who's got more than one kid can tell you that their two kids don't learn the same. That doesn't make one of them a failure. It just means that kids learn differently. I have two daughters. They're both wonderful, smart kids. They're both going to be very successful in life. One of them is very kind of all over the place, and one is very laser-focused. That doesn't mean that one of them is better or worse than the other. It's just different. And yet No Child Left Behind requires every child, from the geniuses down to the special ed kids for whom their one accomplishment for that day might be picking up a pencil, to pass the same tests and meet the same progress every year.